morning, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you for being with us this morning. And we've called this press conference to highlight some of the national issues that are affecting the country at this point in time. And we have with us the leader of the opposition and the president of the People's National Party, MP Mark Golding. He will be accompanied today by the Member of Parliament from Central St. Mary and the spokesperson on health, Dr. Morris Guy. We also have the Member of Parliament from Northwest St. Catherine, and he's the opposition spokesperson on commerce, science, and technology. And he will also have a few words, as you're aware, about a topical matter in relation to our data security. I am, and I've always been and remain, Dayton Campbell, and I will be moderating today. We also have with us Senator Peter Bunting and Reverend Garnet Roper. So at the outset, let's make welcome the leader of the opposition, MP Mark Golding.
Thank you, Dayton. Welcome everyone, members of the media. Jamaica is now in a full-blown health crisis. Our situation has become much worse than our Caribbean neighbors. This has arisen because of poor management of the pandemic. The first major spike in cases began last August and was worsened by the calling of a general election in the middle of that spike. And it is noteworthy that the health authorities announced the advent of community spread in Jamaica the day after the general election. Then, over the Christmas period, we witnessed the usual heavy influx of returning Jamaicans for the holidays. They were permitted to enter the country without being required to have a negative COVID test within 72 hours before boarding the plane to come here. These non-residents were typically coming from the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, all of which were experiencing much higher levels of infection than we were in Jamaica. The quarantine rules were ignored by many, and there was no effective enforcement of those rules. And when they left Jamaica after the holidays, a lot of COVID infection was left here behind. In the 2.5 weeks, or 18 days since February the 4th, we have seen a massive increase in infections, approximately over 5,000 new cases of COVID, which is a substantial portion of the total number of positive cases since March last year. Substantial as in over 25%. The hospitals in the country are either full or very close to being full. We have heard today that the Medical Association of Jamaica is saying that the situation is so bad that a full lockdown of the country may be necessary. The government seems to have dropped their hands. In response to this surge, they moved the curfew start time forward by 2 hours from 10 p.m. to 8 p.m. This measure has the effect of causing heightened congestion in the late afternoons and evenings as persons rush to see to their daily needs and get home by 8 p.m. We have heard no scientific evidence suggesting that this measure is effective in reducing the spread of the virus, but anecdotally we can see how it may be contributing to the worsening of the situation. We, as the opposition, have some proposals for the better management of the health crisis locally, which our medical experts here today will share with you after my presentation. As the crisis worsens, we hear less and less from the Prime Minister. In the earlier stages of the pandemic last year, he held lengthy press conferences on a daily basis. Now, we hardly hear from him as the crisis unfolds. He seems to be in hiding. Given that the situation has been allowed to get out of control here in Jamaica, it makes it all the more critical that we vaccinate our population as quickly as possible. That is the only way that we can recover as a country and get out of this crisis. The Minister of Health established a vaccine commission last year. Despite our request to be part of this, the opposition has been excluded from it. But it turns out that they were doing nothing to try to source vaccines for the country. The government instead put all its eggs in one basket, which is the COVAX facility, which the World Health Organization has been organizing, only to tell us in January that their target for vaccination was a paltry 16% of the population for the whole of 2021. Beginning mid-February, we were told, though it has not yet begun. I and others pointed out that this was entirely unsatisfactory, as Jamaica needs to get herd immunity this year if we are to have any chance of economic recovery and a return to normal life without COVID. The thinking generally is that we must have at least 70% of our population immunized in order to get to herd immunity. It is only very recently that the government has started to scramble to source additional vaccines for Jamaica. Other countries have placed orders and secured sources of supply. Other countries have solicited gifts of vaccine and started to roll out their vaccination programs to their populations. Jamaica is very late. The government is guilty of gross negligence in this critical matter. Money is not the problem. The budget just tabled has $6 billion to pay for sufficient vaccines to achieve herd immunity. But there is no clear structure and line of authority for sourcing the critical supplies we need to get to 70%. It cannot be left to the National Health Fund alone to get this done. As leader of the country, it was and remains the Prime Minister's job to use all his power and influence and network to procure an adequate supply of vaccines for the country. There is no task that is more important to Jamaica's survival, recovery, and future than this right now. Jamaica should be leveraging all our international relationships and friends to get this done. We are late out of the blocks, but we must get organized and do whatever we can to bring the vaccine to Jamaica to protect our people. I am calling on the Prime Minister to establish a high-level task force headed by the Prime Minister himself to take charge of the procurement of vaccines for the country. A competent CEO must be appointed as the czar to run the day-to-day operations of sourcing the vaccine on a full-time basis. There should be weekly reports to the nation of the efforts and progress being made to do this. The approach currently being pursued, which appears haphazard, ad hoc, and not transparent, must end. The opposition is willing and able to join in this effort, if invited. Jamaica needs all hands on deck to save the day. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, I appeal to all my fellow Jamaicans. Now is the time to take this pandemic very seriously, if you have been casual about it so far. We must all increase our vigilance. Wear our masks so that we can avoid getting sick. Keep a reasonable distance and avoid talking up in each other's face. Wash or sanitize your hands regularly. Use our common sense to minimize the spread of this disease. Follow the basic rules of safe living during this pandemic, and let us try to get through it. Thank you. I will now hand over to our health spokesman, Dr. Maurice Guy, to speak to some of what we would like to see happen to help manage the crisis better locally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Party Leader. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Morning. The present state of the Jamaican health sector, as you have been told, is the primary reason for us being here this morning. And it is not an overstatement to say that the hospitals are on the verge of collapse, with overcrowding, absence of bed space, stretched facilities, and most important, staff exhaustion. The three largest hospitals in Jamaica, the University Hospital of the West Indies, the Kingston Public Hospital, and the Cornwall Regional Hospitals are full. The Mandeville Hospital is also full. And last evening we heard that the St. Anne's Bay Hospital is also full. We have been told of other instances where, from over the weekend, the main operating theaters 1 to 5 at the University Hospital of the West Indies, are out of commission, simply because there's no electricity to run the air conditioning units. And furthermore, for weeks now, the ICU air conditioning in ICU A, which is the COVID ICU, has been without air conditioning. There's overcrowding in the hospitals, which has created a crisis, as COVID beds in hospital, as has been indicated, are nearing or having reached exhaustion capacity. It is now critical that patient care is not shortchanged or otherwise weakened, that patients have already been denied surgery because of the overcrowding in hospitals, and only emergency surgeries are being attended to, especially at hospitals like the university and other major hospitals. And what we find, ladies and gentlemen, is that chronic non-communicable diseases, such as diabetes and people living with hypertension and their complications, aren't getting the proper care, resulting in even more serious morbidity and, God forbid, mortality. However, what we have not heard so much are about the challenges facing our frontline workers in the sector and those charged with the administration of the hospitals. And I'll enumerate them. The plight of doctors recently at the Anoto Bay Hospital came to light, not getting the COVID-19 incentive allowance, which was a contractual arrangement with the government. That has remained unresolved. There's also the plight of the doctors at the Mandeville Regional Hospitals, particularly with the interns not having proper protective equipment to do their work as it relates to the COVID testing. 3, despite the continuous assurances from the government that there's no shortage of PPEs, there's an eternal outcry from the medical personnel, the nursing personnel, and all involved. We have also received reports that there are numerous suppliers to hospitals who have not been paid for goods and services for months, and there are instances where providers of sanitation services have not been paid for a long time. There are instances too where hospital personnel, their salary reductions, both statutory and loan obligations, have not been remitted to their respective creditor agencies or to the government agencies. In fact, what is happening now is that the financial institutions are calling on the borrowers to pay up when their salary reduction was already taken from their salary on a monthly basis from as far back as 3-4 months ago. And it is most unfortunate now when government are calling on these people to hold strain and protect the interests of the Jamaican people, that they are not upholding their end of the bargain. We also have the case of the doctors whose contracts have ended in December 2020, and yet have not received any commitments from government as to whether their contracts for employment will be renewed. We can only hope that instances like these do not negatively impact our health team's morale. It is hard when government does not keep its end of the bargain. Some time ago, ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Minister of Health announced that the government was allocating $422 million for the COVID vaccine publicity program. This announcement and the magnitude of the spend raised immediate heightened concerns against the backdrop of the issues that I just recently enunciated. And speaking on behalf of the parliamentary opposition, and as the leader said, we believe the 422 announced by the minister is a wanton waste of public resources which cannot be afforded, particularly at this time. The Prime Minister has since signaled a revision of the amount. We eagerly await the revised allocation and the projects to be undertaken. And despite the assurance of the Prime Minister and his appearance to say that this correction has been made, we are puzzled by the original announcement by the Minister, Dr. Tufton, and a further denial or dismissing of reports that there was ever such an allocation. Ladies and gentlemen, this particular document that was tabled in the Parliament of Jamaica speaks to that $422 million. Today, we are expressing our concerns about the increasing number of COVID-19 positive cases in Jamaica. And we have had over 400 deaths so far. We have always made suggestions. We have made suggestions to the government from day one. We have spoken to their missteps along the way. We have called for more testing from day one. And since the introduction of antigen testing, we have repeatedly asked the government to increase the number of testing and the number of facilities that are permitted to test. The government's decision to only allow 7 private laboratories to do COVID-19 antigen and PCR testing is not enough. The decision by government to certify only 2 antigen testing kits is also unacceptable. What is most egregious, though, is that the government has not allowed antigen testing facilities at the point-of-care facilities, even by the ministry's outreach team, which goes into the communities and even at the hospitals. Now, when you do the testing at the community, and if it is our mandate to track, trace, and test, certainly those who are in the field as part of the contact tracing team should be organized to conduct COVID-19 testing in the field, isolate and quarantine those persons who have been found to be positive, and those samples sent further for PCR testing at the government laboratory. Currently, our practice has been to administer the tests, the samples. Then they are sent to the regional health authority labs or to the National Public Health Laboratory. In approximately 3 to 5 days, the results are returned, and in some instances, up to 7 days, as was cited as example at the Manville Regional Hospital. This delay in getting test results cannot help in this fight to curb the pandemic. In fact, this current modus operandi allows for a greater spread of the virus. The government has not been aggressive enough in trying to contact trace these individuals, and it is our view that this is part of the reason why the numbers have been significantly increasing. Therefore, we, the opposition, are forced to reiterate what we have concluded months ago, that the government's approach to the COVID-19 pandemic has been one of mismanagement. We've always made recommendations, and we continue to give our best advice from our group of medical experts and others. It is up to the government to do what it will with the advice. The party leader spoke about the daily numbers we have seen. But what we have seen recently is on Saturday, the numbers of almost 100 patients who are either moderately or critically ill. And that gives us an idea as to how severe the illness is in creating hospitalization for our patients and our citizens. The Minister of Health has almost 1 year, shy of 1 month, to make provisions for additional bed space. The system has over 300 COVID beds, and the country has been informed that there are field hospitals at Falmouth and St. Joseph's Hospital, and one at the National Church, which is to be relocated to Spanish Town. But after months of waiting, ladies and gentlemen, after months of being told that they are there and they are ready or soon will be ready, only shell is there. Only shells are there, awaiting equipment and personnel. Today at this press conference, we are not only expressing our disappointment in the management of the pandemic by the government, but also to offer once again our recommendations for improving the situation to begin the journey back to normality. These include: 1, increasing number and access to highly sensitive and highly specific antigen test kits. Open the market for more players to bring in these tests to reduce the price points, resulting in lower prices for the patients and the clients, especially for persons of low to moderate incomes. COVID-19 being a class 1 notifiable disease obligates every practitioner who encounters a positive COVID-19, who encounters the Ministry of Health. And then this can be corroborated by PCR testing by the ministry. So you allow private practitioners to give that particular test in facilities where it can be done. Antigen test. Allow antigen test to be a point of care test, which is what I just said, so that medical doctors and government health centers and all hospitals, not just the regional ones, have access to rapid testing of clients or patients who present themselves to these facilities. And why it's important for hospitals is that if you do an antigen test on admission, you prevent the risk of intermingling positive with negative patients on the same ward. All of those persons were already sick, but some are COVID positive, some are COVID negative. But when you commingle all of them on the same ward initially, awaiting this test from the National Public Health Authority 3 to 5 days, then you run the risk of exposing those initial negative ones to become positive. 5, ensure, as the party leader said, that all persons arriving at our port of entry have a COVID-19 negative test at least 72 hours old, whether they are visitors, at most 72 hours old, sorry, whether they are visitors, tourists, returning residents, or Jamaican nationals. And 6, introduce a new phase of messaging which is culturally appropriate and relevant to the stage of the pandemic. If you ask a question, ladies and gentlemen, what do you understand by the positivity rate? And you ask the general population, they have no idea. We need clearer messages to our people so they understand. And 7, to reiterate what the party leader said about mask wearing, social distancing, avoiding the crowds, avoiding the round robins, avoiding the parties, avoiding the beaches party, avoiding the key parties, and the other measures such as this. The Minister of Health promised the country, and I'm going to speak to vaccines now, that we'll have a rollout in the country by the middle of February. And that vaccinations for persons would begin much earlier than the previously announced time of mid-March. But we are in the 4th week of February now, and there has been no indication as to when these vaccines will arrive and when vaccination will begin. It, ladies and gentlemen, has become a national embarrassment. As a matter of fact, Jamaica is seemingly the last Caribbean country to receive vaccines and begin the vaccination of our people. In fact, I was advised this morning that it's only Jamaica and Haiti which have not started a program so far. Our CARICOM partners such as Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Antigua, St. Kitts and Nevis, and many others, Dominica, have started their vaccination programs. In our estimation, as the party leader said, the government was late and tardy in accessing vaccines and was initially totally reliant on procuring the 16% that would have come through the COVAX facility. But we were told by the Honorable Minister of Finance and Planning, supported by documentation and presented by the Minister of Health, that there's a $5 billion allocation in the estimates for 21-22 fiscal year, which will be allocated to purchase vaccines for 2 million of our people. The challenge opposition has with this, though, is that in one of the presentations, the government indicated that it will be buying vaccines for 300,000 of our citizens, which is going to cost us, that 300,000 is going to cost us 19.7 million US dollars, which is 57% of the vaccine budget. Whereas the other 1.7 million persons to be vaccinated will only cost 14 million US dollars. And if you break it down to Jamaican dollars, the purchase of Moderna, 600,000 doses, 2 doses per person. So it works out to 300,000 citizens will cost the government $2.8 billion, whereas to vaccinate the other 1.7 billion Jamaican citizens, it will cost $2.2 billion. The country must be told of the vaccination plan of the Wholeness Administration, including phases of the plan for the frontline workers, the vulnerable population, and the general public. What we are concerned about, like most Jamaicans, is that the vaccines may arrive in Jamaica, but instead of a seamless rollout, we might be bordering on chaos with the possibility of the vaccines not reaching the intended groups. And if there's going to be buy-in by the population of the program, then the government needs to be transparent and advise us of the plans that are in place before the rollout begins. There's another document that came out from the Ministry of Health, and I want to bring it to the attention of the Jamaican people. The budget for the vaccine program, despite the minister saying that the $422 million is not for PR, they've given us another iteration of that program. And it speaks of procuring vaccines, procuring syringes, 3.585676 syringes to administer for the vaccination program. And the government is budgeting 55 US cents per syringe. That works out to 87 Jamaican dollars per syringe. I made calls this morning because when I saw that, I realized that I was flabbergasted. Syringes, which are 3 cc syringes, which are bigger than what is required for vaccination, cost $13 per syringe. Those that you need for vaccine are cheaper. So we'd like to know how the government got this 55 US cents or 87 Jamaican dollars per syringe for the vaccination program. And we urge, as all Jamaicans do, to have the government look at this again. Because as a country, we can ill afford this. This is squandering of the people's money in this country by this government. So back to the vaccine. In the absence of the vaccine rollout, in the absence of information by the government, the opposition is proposing the following measures. 1, the identification of persons who would need to get vaccination should have already been done by community health aides in the communities. They should also be advised of where they will access these vaccines and what measures will be in place for them to access the vaccines. Incorporate all churches in the program. And if we ask any member of the Jamaican population if a health worker has come to see you to find out if you are 65 and older and where you'd like to go and get the vaccine, the resounding answer would be no. 2, we do not feel that the health care facilities such as health centers and hospitals will be the ideal place for the vaccination sites. They do not allow for proper social distancing. Therefore, we are recommending to the government, where possible, school auditoriums, large public areas such as the National Arena, National Sports Complex, community centers, and other such facilities right across the country be looked at as immunization sites. They should be equipped adequately with equipment for persons who may have allergic reactions to these vaccines. This mass vaccination will most ideally be done on weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, or if school is not in session, to be utilized during the weekdays. In addition, these large areas should be centrally located and allow for proper social distancing of persons. It is time that whatever logistics arrangements are in place, that the people of this country are alerted so we can have early buy-in. The government needs to enter into an arrangement with private medical practitioners who currently administer vaccines and who see a significant number of the population to be engaged in the vaccination process with proper reporting to the Ministry of Health through the local respective medical officers of health. The opposition strongly believes that if the government take these proposals on board, along with those that were enunciated by the leader of the opposition, we can begin to turn the corner. The COVID-19 numbers are increasing in Jamaica, while every other country has started to trend downwards. This time, the time to go at it alone is past. The government must create the environment for a national approach, which includes the opposition, the private sector, the trade unions, as well as professional and non-professional bodies. Arrogance, ladies and gentlemen, will not cut it. Lives and livelihoods are at stake. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Guy, for a very comprehensive presentation. I do hope that everyone that was listening is way more informed as to where we are currently with the state of affairs, and that you're fully familiar with the proposals that are coming from the opposition. At this point in time, I'm going to open the floor to take some questions in relation to the health issues, and then after that, we will take a statement from MP Graham and Senator Morris. So questions, ladies and gentlemen, just indicate and identify yourself.
Good morning, Robian Williams, CVM TV. All right, so at the onset of COVID-19, and persons are still floating the protocols, you had alluded to a ticketing system. Is that still on the table? Are you still suggesting that at this point in time?
Thank you very much for the question. The reality is that we have felt from day one that in light of the nature and the behavior of our Jamaican people, that it might be prudent for them to pay where it hurts them most. In July or June of last year in the Parliament, when we were meeting at the conference center, I suggested to the Prime Minister under statements by Minister that some legislative action be taken against persons who flout the Disaster Risk Management Act. Subsequently in August, July, we were told that the government is contemplating a system similar to the traffic ticketing system. But we have been told since September that it soon be here, it soon be here, it soon be here. It sounds like a politician some time ago who said, when was the election? He said, soon, soon. Now, we are now in February, almost at the end of February, and we are no longer near into that system. It is our view that if the Jamaican government is serious about it, and certainly the numbers are not showing that our people are serious about it, that we will still support such a move if and when it comes along.
I think it's important that the public realize that not one single piece of legislation targeting COVID has been brought to the Parliament by the government since the pandemic commenced a year ago. Not one single piece of legislation. They are relying entirely on the Disaster Risk Management Act, which was passed under the last PNP administration, which was really primarily designed for acts of God such as hurricanes and earthquakes and the like. The orders that the Prime Minister can make under that act, breach of them is not a criminal offense. And the enforcement is problematic because of that. In order to create an offense, a police officer has to give a direction, and the person who has breached the order has to continue to breach it, and that constitutes an offense. They have done nothing to fix that issue. So when we talk about the lack of enforcement, the government, in my opinion, has not really taken that issue seriously because they're fully aware of the problem and they've done nothing about it. We have reached a stage now where we have to revisit how we deal with this matter of ensuring that our population takes the social distancing protocols properly. The preference is, as has been said by Dr. Guy, a revamped approach to public education around social distancing and the importance of mask wearing and keeping a reasonable distance from others. That must be emphasized through jingles, through flyers, through social media, etc. But at the end of the day, if those rules can be flouted without any consequence, then are they going to be upheld? And we're seeing the result of the indiscipline in certain quarters and the lack of adherence to the protocols and the quarantining rules. Not one piece of legislation has been brought to the Parliament by the government since the pandemic began to address the pandemic directly.
All right, thank you. Just to follow up, to be clear, is the opposition at this time supporting an initiation of a lockdown?
Our position is that that decision has to be dictated by the data. Part of our proposal is that where in geographic areas where you find that there is increased numbers, then you do what is situationally appropriate. Then you do a lockdown at those areas. But those lockdowns have to be supported by special and proper and intensified social security concerns and issues so that we don't have people who are in lockdowns are unable to get food. The experiences that we have had in the past where we have lockdowns in Bull Bay, in Portmore, in St. Mary, in Clarendon, and people complaining that the Social Security Ministry has not been able to give them sufficient food cannot be allowed to happen if we continue to have these rise spikes and then there's community lockdown.
So a total lockdown is the last resort, isn't it?
Yes, and certainly a total lockdown would be a last resort.
Any more questions?
We have a question online from Kimberly Preddy of Nationwide 90 FM. This question is for the opposition leader. How can you accuse the Prime Minister of gross negligence when the Prime Minister did make himself clear from day one when he stated he will only accept vaccines that are approved by the WHO?
The administering of the vaccines to the population would have to await WHO approval. And several vaccines have been approved by the WHO already. But you have to undertake the procurement arrangements in anticipation of that. You cannot wait until there is approval before you decide to procure, especially when other countries have moved forward and have made those arrangements on a timely basis. So the failure to act, the failure to make any arrangements, and the excuse that you're awaiting WHO approval doesn't carry water. WHO approval has been in place for some time now for the Pfizer vaccine, for the AstraZeneca vaccine in particular, which is a much cheaper one and doesn't need special cooling arrangements, and also for the Moderna vaccine, I believe. And there are more coming regularly. The government should have made arrangements to secure a source and supply pending the approval, and when the approval is in place, they can then be administered. And the approval has been in place for several of them for some time now.
Any other questions? Who? Vashan?
We have a question from Sanjay Lewis from Morning Agenda. It says, it's a follow-up. Based on the data that currently exists, is it that the opposition is not currently in support of a total lockdown? If not, what would be the trigger for a complete lockdown?
Ultimately, that decision is a technical one based on the advice of the public health professionals and the data that they are getting in as to where the cases are based, where the spikes are. Is it a general spike all across the country, or are there particular locations which are problematic? Our preference would be to avoid a total lockdown of the economy for as long as possible. And as has been said, the idea of proactively going into those communities where there are severe spikes, ensuring that those persons get adequate supplies of food, testing them, isolating and quarantining, and managing the situation on a rolling basis as you deal with each scenario as it unfolds would be our preference. But ultimately, the decision as to whether or not to have a total lockdown has to be informed by what the public health professionals are saying based on the data. We don't have all that data, so I'm not in a position to say whether or not I support it. If it reaches a point where it becomes absolutely necessary, then one has to support it. But at this point, I'm not clear that that is the situation.
There's a question from Akira Davis from the Gleaner. What is the opposition's position on the reopening of the entertainment industry? Which I believe you'll take. Will you be taking that question now, moderator?
On the reopening of the entertainment industry. Yeah.
The opposition leader will take the question.
Yeah. We are fully aware and very sympathetic for the entertainment practitioners, many of whom have been without any income for many, many months now. And this particular industry is one that affects the masses of the people, because we know that entertainment is a source of income and survival in many communities in Jamaica, low-income communities and so on, where persons make a living from doing people's hair, nails, selling cane, jerk chicken, etc. And none of that has been happening because entertainment has been shut down. Clearly, it's a balancing act. I know that the entertainment professionals are of the view that measures can be put in place and monitored that would enable some entertainment other than just the virtual online entertainment to resume. In the height of this pandemic and the spike that we now have, I think that we'd have to be extremely careful about pursuing that at this particular moment. But I think as soon as it becomes possible, we should start to allow closely monitored events where social distancing protocols are maintained so as to allow people who live off of that industry to resume some form of income earning for themselves and their families.
Are there any more questions? And by the way, we did facilitate a meeting with the practitioners within the entertainment industry to hear their concerns and their recommendations as to the difficulties that they're facing and how they think the sector can move forward. It is important to also note that the era of tracing, of being able to do the contact tracing for the different events would be something that the government would have to make a priority. And so when one has resources like $400 and something million, it's probably better if you were to engage some community health aides and do more contact tracing than to focus that on just a PR program. You would have a greater benefit to the nation, and you'll be able to have some of these sectors re-engage as soon as your active cases decreases. There's a comment from Dr. Guy, and then I will ask MP Hugh Graham to say a few things and then take questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Campbell. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think you appreciate the full extent to which the health sector is in crisis. But one only has to look at the letter, media advisory coming out of the University Hospital last night, which speaks to the severity of the problem. And basically what it is saying, and in my own coinage, if you have a heart attack and need to come to the University Hospital, call me first. Don't just come. It is as bad as that, ladies and gentlemen. And we are here spending money, buying syringe at 55 US cents per unit, 422 million on a public relations campaign, and we are in dire straits at our hospitals. The government needs to wake up and recognize what it is. Health, in as much as COVID is important, health has to be the #1 mantra to keep our people safe, healthy, and for the economy to continue to run. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Guy. Now make welcome MP Hugh Graham, who will speak about matters in relation to his portfolio.
Good morning, leader. Morning, everyone. Welcome to the media. The opposition position on the data breach, which I have the responsibility to speak on that portfolio. We have questions, and there are far more questions than answers that are coming. So the questions that we have surround what does a contract look like? Because persons are asking us to say, okay, we should bring solutions and suggestions, but without knowing the terms of the contract, then it's very difficult to say what questions, what suggestions that you will be bringing forward. So, for example, there are questions surrounding the authentication of the app, the security of the app, who approved the app and made sure that not just the usability of it and the robustness, but it was protected. And the data, which are the people's identity, that those were protected. So there are a lot of questions surrounding the matter, and there's just not enough answers or any answers that are coming. So we're probing, and we're interested to hear what the Minister of National Security has to say, what the Technology Minister has to say, because he's very quiet, and what the Minister of Health has to say, and in fact what the government is saying about this, because it's very important to our people and also to the visitors that we invite to come here. Thank you.
I will now ask Senator Morris to say a few words, and then both of them will take your questions. Senator Morris.
Thank you, Jensek. Good morning, everyone. On the issue of sports, we continue to reiterate that it is totally possible for sports to resume here in Jamaica once we have in place mechanisms that will allow for a cautious and also a safe rollout. What we are experiencing presently is that the go-ahead has been given for some events, while there are other disciplines who are still awaiting approval. And we continue to urge the government to move with some sort of alacrity to allow for persons to resume sporting activities in Jamaica. We've seen across the world, we've seen in the Caribbean region where sports have been resumed in a safe fashion, and so we're confident that it can happen here in Jamaica. Another thing that I would like to underscore is the need for the welfare of athletes to be taken into consideration. For almost 11 months, many of our athletes have been out of work, and it is imperative that the government yield to their plight and also consider putting in place mechanisms to safeguard them as they look to represent Jamaica on the world scale. And so I'm proposing, and I continue to urge the government to consider vaccination protocols for athletes, to consider support for athletes. And I'm confident that if this is done, then we'll be able to represent on the world scale. It is also imperative that we also look to providing and maintaining conditions for the safe resumption. And the experts have said it, that it is quite possible for low-risk sports, non-contact sports to be played. And so I continue to urge the government to give the go-ahead for these persons to resume their livelihood. And I'm hoping that this will happen in a short time to come.
Thank you very much, Senator Morris. Questions?
We have a question online from Jason Cross from The Observer. This question is for you, Mr. Golding. What comments can you give on the handling of the Jam COVID app and website?
Well, it is clear that the security arrangements for that very important app and portal were inadequate. The government embraced what they said was a free solution, but they didn't seem to do any form of due diligence on the security arrangements that would support the use of that portal. It is only when TechCrunch, a journalist, a newspaper that specializes in searching for weaknesses in cyber arrangements, brought this to the attention of the public, that we realized that there was this real problem, a fairly elementary but fundamental problem in the security arrangements for the Jam COVID site. We were then told that these had been addressed and an independent third party had reviewed and said that all the arrangements were satisfactory, only to hear that there has been another fundamental breach of the security arrangements there, which has exposed the data of many thousands of people. Things like signatures, things like passport information, etc., to the possibility of identity theft and other misuse and misappropriation of persons' identities. So we would like to know exactly what is the deal between the government and the developer of this portal. We'd like to see the contract made public and tabled in Parliament as well. We want to know what guarantees are in that contract, what indemnities are in that contract, what compensation is there in that contract for the person operating the app. We were told it was free, but maybe the 3-day development process we were told about was free. But are they being remunerated for operating the app or not? And who owns the data on that app? Who owns the data that has been put up on that portal? We don't know. These are important issues that the public has a strong interest in knowing. It is very unfortunate that this has happened, but I think the response of launching a criminal investigation as the first response is inappropriate. The TechCrunch journalist who brought this to the public's attention and continues to be vigilant has done a great service to enable the thing to be fixed before perhaps, hopefully, miscreants, cyber thieves have accessed and stolen the data and to use it. We do not know yet whether that has happened. We do not know what is being done to warn people that their information may have been compromised. We were told by Minister Matthew Samuda, I think, that 700 people had been contacted. But the truth is that many thousands of people, visitors to Jamaica, including Jamaicans, have used that app. So we need, I think, a much more robust response from the Ministry of National Security and the Ministry of Technology and the Ministry of Health to investigate what has happened and what measures are going to be put in place to protect the people whose data may have been compromised, and to ensure that the app is safe and can be used safely by those who are traveling to Jamaica.
Thank you.
One more question from
questions?
Jason Cross. Well, sorry, this is from Akira. Question for Dr. Guy. What mechanisms do you think should be in place to allow for the smooth distribution of AstraZeneca vaccine?
It's an interesting question. What mechanisms are in place would I suggest for the smooth distribution should be of the AstraZeneca vaccines? Well, first of all, I think that the government needs to identify the persons who are going to get it in the first phase. We have been told that the persons over 60, the persons with comorbid conditions, but as far as we are aware, these persons are are those who are culled from the public health system. So the others who go to the private practitioners who are over 60, who have comorbid conditions, do not know. We do not know if John Brown, who lives in the hills of Guy's Hill in St. Catherine, has been contacted to say that, okay, you're over 60 and this is what needs to know. You need to know. We also need for the people to be told, where is it that you're going to get the vaccine? All of this is important. I mean, the timetable has been moved up, but we never saw any logistics arrangements from day one as what the timetable would be for a March rollout. We were told a February rollout is what is going to happen, but that timetable is not even given to us from day one, so we can modify it for a February rollout. So these are some of the concerns we have. We know that we have a good team of public health practitioners in Jamaica. That is not for debate. We have them. But the truth is that we also have that team who are responsible for the regular childhood vaccination programs that are to take place. They have other things to do in the public health sector. We have been told that there's training for more persons to administer these vaccines, but that's all we have been told. Government has not come and said, what are the nuts and bolts? What are the X, Y, Zs? What are the steps that are going to be taken? And this is what we as the opposition, representing the vast majority of Jamaicans who are asking this question, we're asking on their behalf.
And the final question for you, Mr. Golding, from Shannon Dale from My Jamaica Today and Love 101 News. Love 101 News. Has the opposition participated in any of the sports and entertainment stakeholder meetings? And if yes, what are the recommendations for a safe reopening of the sectors?
Well, I think we've already spoken to the latter question. I'm not going to repeat the answer given. We have not been included in, I would say, many of the activities that have taken place to try and address sectoral issues. For example, the Economic Task Force to try and identify how to ensure that the economy recovers. We were excluded from that task force. The COVID Vaccine Commission, we have been excluded from that commission. And whatever sectoral meetings may have been taking place between the government and the entertainment industry or the sports industry, we have not been included either. We have taken it upon ourselves to apprise ourselves of the issues by convening meetings with those sectors ourselves. And we have had, as was said by the General Secretary, we had a meeting with about 30 entertainment practitioners to hear from them what their suggestions are, what their problems are, so we could try and fashion our own solutions to the issues that they face and to advocate on their behalf. In terms of the sports situation, we are in touch with the key players in some of the leading sports to see what is happening, to be aware of what is happening. And as our spokesperson for sports has indicated, we believe it is possible to have a resumption of many sports in a way that is very sensitive to the issues around the spread of the infection. So that, for example, football, which is our industry in Jamaica, which goes into the grassroots communities and where thousands of people rely on that for their own survival, not just players and coaches and technical staff, but the communities as a whole that attend these matches and the vendors and so on that support them. And we feel that if you look at what has happened in other countries, which have had worse rates of infection than we had, it is possible to resume football. We have seen, for example, in the UK and in Germany and so on, matches that are not played in front of spectators. And that has been put forward by the clubs as the solution during the COVID pandemic. And there must be testing and so on made available to try and manage the situation. So we've heard that the government wants to resume certain sports. They announced that. We've heard nothing since. I know that the applications have been submitted for review because they said there's an application process, and I'm aware that applications have been submitted for review. And I'm also aware that they have heard nothing from the government in response to those applications. This is obviously a very difficult time, and we must be very cautious in how we proceed. But I do believe it is possible if the protocols are clearly worked out and follow the best practices that have been developed in other jurisdictions which have even worse problems than we do, we can resume sports in an appropriate and safe way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leader. And let me say thanks to you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here with us this morning, going into the afternoon. And thank you very much to those who joined us online. And thank you for your question and interest in the matters that we had to discuss. We continue to play our role in being a partner, in looking out for the best interest of the Jamaican people. God bless you and have a good afternoon.